Okay, so today I thought I'd share about creating your own brand. Because people do not fall in love with your company, they fall in love with your brand. And although I'm on my journey of creating my own brand, I thought I would share with you the few things that I focused on when I thought about mine. I'm Jocelyn, I'm the founder of A+CE, and welcome to another deep dive video on creating your own company. So as I said, people fall in love with your brand and not your company. So it's really important for you to figure out what your brand represents. Who are you? I've heard somewhere, and this has stuck with me ever since, and that your brand really is an extension of you. What is your unique identity? What sets you apart from other people? What are your passions, your strengths, and your values? Take some time to actually reflect on that and then write them down. Remember, authenticity is key when it comes to creating your brand and for your target audience. And in my previous deep dive videos, I talked about the importance of knowing who your target audience is, as well as knowing and having a clear vision of who your ideal client is. And do check those videos out if you're interested, and I'll also try and see if I can put a link somewhere here for you to click on. And then, what are your brand values? And before you go and write down every single value that you have, don't be greedy. Just because it's not written doesn't mean it doesn't exist and doesn't mean you don't hold that true to heart. There are also no right or wrong values at all. The question really goes back to who you are and what you're trying to represent. But the important thing to remember is that this is not personal values, but what values your company and your brand is willing to hold for the rest of its life, and how you want the brand to then run as a reflection of those values. So really dive in and just ask yourself, what values do you hold dear and you cherish? Because as simple as it potentially sounds, your values will actually form the fundamental parts of the rule book of how you will run your brand. And so it's actually really important that you stick to it as you go and regularly go back to your values. Maybe try printing it out and sticking it on the office wall or something like that, so you're constantly reminded of it. And if you are struggling to come up with some brand values, it's worth looking at your competitors' websites and other sort of websites within the sort of realm that you're doing business in and see what their brand values are. It's not to say that you have to copy them, but it actually does help keep the creative juices flowing and give you some inspiration as to what your brand values might be. And the final thing I kind of want to talk about is trademarking, because trademarking really is then you putting that stamp on your brand to make it legitimate. Now, it's very common for people to confuse the difference between trademarking and the company name. And I personally definitely didn't know what trademarking was until I started my own company and had to trademark my own name. But basically, your company name can be completely different to your trademark. So for example, your company name could be your name, and it's basically the name that gets registered that runs the business. And then the trademark would be the name of your brand, basically what gets put on the product. And trademarking can be a long-winded process depending on how good you are at trademarking, because the process of trademarking really is to differentiate yourself with your competitors. So really make sure that no other brands use the same name or logo. And it's easy for you to do a quick search. There are a lot of free search engines out there for trademarks that you can search on to see if the name that you've come up with matches with anyone similar. But a few key things for you to be aware of for trademarking. Firstly, again, make sure that your name and your trademark and your logo does not match with someone else. And obviously that's just to make sure that you stand out. Secondly, ensure that the meaning of your logo doesn't end up unintentionally offending other people, whether that's a religion, a trend, social identity, etc. And then finally, check on social media to make sure that there's no or limited overlap on your name. And again, there are also free name checkers, and there is a website called namechecker.com where you can actually check whether the name that you have is taken up by all the different social media platforms. And then the final step of trademarking is really just to submit it to the trademarking office. And that, depending on where you are in this world, can range between a couple of months to even longer. And that process includes just to make sure that there's no one else with a similar name, and if there is someone with a similar name, that they can actually object to you having that trademark. But the main thing to focus on when you're applying for your trademark is to focus on what you're actually selling and your product. If you saw my vlog on my trademarking, you realize that actually it's a very long-winded process and there are a lot of different categories just within clothing. And so my advice is really just for you to focus on what you're selling the most, and then you can always branch out afterwards. But yeah, if you're from the UK or just want to know what the whole process is like, do check out my vlog episode as well. I practically vlogged the whole thing. It basically shows you from the start to finish what it gets involved in creating a brand and trademarking your brand. But that's it. I hope I provided a simple enough walkthrough of how you can start creating your brand and what to be aware of. And if you're interested in my personal journey with A+CE, do check out and subscribe and look at my vlogs. I make sure that I vlog every update as I can and as detailed as I can as possible. And when there's not much happening, I tend to try and create deep dive videos like this this one to try and be transparent about what it's like to create a brand from absolute scratch and zero experience. So yes, like, subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!